Hopefully some of you are subscribers, and if you're not, please check out big4bio.com. We are the premier aggregator of news and developments across the entire life sciences sector, especially focusing on eight leading life sciences regions in the country. Three of which happen to be in California, so the Bay Area, San Diego, and then Los Angeles, where I'm based. So this is our second of two California webinars that we're doing this week, and so really excited to be in my backyard with this. And we've got Brian Shu, I'll introduce in a moment, who is also close by in Orange County. But first, want to introduce Chris Sarlo from Life Science Wealth, which is a wealth management firm focused on the life sciences industry. And Chris has got a great story about not just why we're doing this webinar series, but why he started Life Science Wealth in the first place.
I appreciate that, Dave. Thank you so much. Um, Good afternoon, everybody on the West Coast, and I know there's a couple people who are from other areas that are just happen to be on this call. So thank you guys for joining us. For those of you who don't know who Life Science Wealth is, we are, as Dave said, a financial advisory firm that has exclusive focus on the life sciences and helping out people like yourselves inside of this industry. I've been doing financial advisory for about 27 years now. And the reason that I kind of started Life Science Wealth was actually due to my father. My father is my mentor, my idol, and any other positive word that I can say about a man. And my dad went through a massive heart attack a number of years ago that we thought he was going to be taken from us. And it was the advancements of life science, the things that you guys do every day when it comes to surgical procedure, when it comes to pharma, when it comes to med device, when it comes to research, all the different things that you do that not only saved my dad's life, but allow him to live a completely normal life. And this company was started to give back to you guys, so you guys could be much more efficient and effective at what you do while still being able to advance the science in the way that you guys want to and need to for the rest of the world. So somebody else's loved one is going to be saved by the advancements that you guys make. And we're very happy to be a part of that and continue to do so for years to come. I'll introduce the other two gentlemen that are here with us today. We'll start with Mark. Mark Brummel is a tax advisor with PYA. Mark, if you can introduce yourself and we can get started from there.
Sure. As Chris alluded to, my name is Mark Brimbelow. I'm the managing principal of tax at PYA. And PYA, as some of you may know, more of you probably don't know, PYA is a full service accounting firm serving clients in all 50 states. And we are probably 80% focused in the healthcare sector. So that's life sciences, that's everything from physician practices to medical devices, all the way through large health systems. And so, when given this opportunity to join this presentation, I thought this would be a great opportunity to try to help educate as part of this as part of the webinar series. I'm excited to be able to do so, and I'm looking forward to sharing with you guys.
Thanks, Mark. Also down on my other corner here is Brian Chu. Brian, if you can introduce yourself and what you do.
Great. Thanks, Dave and Chris. My name is Brian Chu. I'm the managing attorney of OC Wills and Trust Attorneys. We're based here in Orange County with offices in Irvine, Anaheim Hills, and Huntington Beach, although we service clients throughout California. We primarily prepare wills and trusts for our clients to make sure, God forbid, something happens to them, pass on, become incapacitated, that somebody they're choosing in charge themselves, in charge of their assets, and most importantly, for people like myself of minor children, in charge of our kids.
Appreciate that.
Awesome. Yeah, thank you so much. Really great to have you back, Brian, and of course Mark and Chris. Excited. We've been getting a rhythm down with this, so it's a really fun conversation everyone's in for. And kind of kicking this off, I mentioned that Chris had kind of started brainstorming this idea with us last fall, and really the reason for this is that there's there's some unique nuances that are part of the world of life sciences and life sciences professionals. And so I want to hear from everyone sort of, what do you see in terms of common patterns, maybe even blind spots that those in the life sciences industry have when it comes to financial planning? And Chris, I'll let you kick that off.
Yeah, thanks. Because we have that exclusivity to life sciences, we get to see a lot of those patterns that Dave's talking about. And the two biggest ones that come to mind are one of them, the people inside of this industry are so extremely laser focused on the research, on the planning, on the med device, on the pharma, on the different things that they're working on to advance the science, that they tend to put their financial planning onto the back burner. And first off, I'll commend you guys for taking the steps to even be a part of this today, because it shows that it's not necessarily on the back burner for everybody, that you guys have taken these steps to be a part of this today. So thank you so much for that. But the second part is we are arguably the smartest industry in the world. I'll put us at number one without having any too much argument when it comes to that. Secondly, we're one of the highest paid industries in the world. The 2023 number is 142,700 on average for people inside of our industry, which is well above the national average when it comes to income levels. The sad part of our industry is when it comes to net worth, we are actually below national average when it comes to the net worth side of things. And so if we have really, really smart people who make really, really good money, there's kind of like no real excuse for us to be below national average when it comes to that side of it. And we believe that is because of the laser focused side of working on a consistent basis all the time, and putting that stuff to the back burner. So we want to bring it to the forefront. We want to make things a little bit better for you guys when it comes to that. The second reason that what makes you guys a little bit more exclusive when it comes to it is that the life science industry, as you probably all know, is a pretty nomadic industry. People tend to change jobs, whether it's to follow the money, whether it's to follow the science, whether it's for an exciting new opportunity that hasn't been scientifically documented or proven yet, and you just think, wow, this is really cool, and I just want to kind of go be a part of that. But people tend to kind of move jobs, move states, to be a part of these different pieces. And that creates a lot of conflict later down the road, because you may not know what assets that you have. You end up having a whole bunch of different 401k accounts that are all over the place. If you have equity, which Mark is going to touch upon in a little bit, there's equity components that are in all these different companies from where you've worked at in the past. And as Brian will touch to in a little bit, it's when all of this comes to a head, what are you going to do with it all, and how are you going to manage it in a proper way to make sure you're running as effectively and efficiently as you can? And those are the couple things that I see that are unique to our industry.
Excellent. Thank you. Mark, what are your take on that?
Yeah, it's kind of amplifying on Chris's point, which is in all those transitory phases, a lot of times that you're in different circumstances, right? Early in your careers, you may have been in an employee-employer relationship, so that brings its own opportunities, its own challenges. Later in your career stage, you might end up potentially founding a company. Maybe you're joining together in a kind of a strategic venture where you're doing more capital raising, you're doing a little bit more risk taking, you're betting on yourself, as I would say, right? You're taking an opportunity to see something to fruition, so in kind of a leadership role. Gosh, you know what? Sometimes those things work out in such a lucrative way as you productize your deliverable, your solution, your med tech, whatever the case may be. You might find yourself in a position where you're post transaction in a highly liquid event. Maybe that brings its own set of challenges when it comes to wealth planning, when it comes to tax planning. And so that's really where I feel like, more than potentially any other industry sector, I feel like life sciences kind of runs this huge swath of possibilities in terms of what people find themselves in terms of their relationship with their employer, or their relationship with their work. And so I think that presents some challenges, But I think those are challenges that are fun to meet as you kind of navigate your career path.
Excellent. Brian, anything to add to that in terms of what you see?
I mean, we're doing planning and and it goes hand in hand with obviously wealth planning to make more money, tax planning to save money. And then in my case, though, our planning doesn't make anybody or save any money for people while they're alive, but it's still necessary to make sure the right people are in charge when you can't be. And so that's the challenge for us. Anytime we're dealing with people who are in high intensity professions rather, doctors, attorneys, we tend to be the worst planners. We've got other things on the front burner that we got to deal with, and we'll get to estate planning when we get to it. We know we need to do it, but the challenge in any of these high intensity professions is getting the momentum to get the planning done, and that's why we work hand in hand with people like Chris and Mark. A lot of times we're the start of the planning. And then the tax and the financial planning are all part of that planning process everybody needs to do. But again, the biggest challenge for us is convincing people that to do something that won't typically affect them on a day-to-day basis. Obviously, at best, it's going to give them peace of mind, but you still need to do it.
Awesome. Now that's good points, and good segue into thinking about sort of both where you start and what are we really talking about here. And Chris, we've been talking a lot about this. So when I typically think of wealth management, it's really kind of just managing it's managing your money, managing your stocks and bonds, but it's really a lot more than that. Kind of how do you look at it from the life science wealth standpoint?
Yeah, when it comes to the process that we've built, we deal in what's called all 9 areas of wealth, investment management being one piece of the 9 when it comes to it. But at the end of the day, more wealth will actually be created via the other systems than it actually will be just on based on performance return. It's going to be based on your cash flow. It's going to be based on your credit and how much debt you have outstanding. It's going to be based on your tax situation. It's going to be based on your estate situation. It's going to be based on philanthropy. Education planning, all these different of the 9 elements, all the different and how they work together as cogs in the wheel to actually truly create wealth over time. And it becomes very important for our clients to understand how the different mechanisms in themselves run, but then how they work together as an entire group to create wealth over time. So for the vast majority of advisors, planners, whatever they want to call themselves out there, are purely investment advisors. They're just telling you, as Dave said, what stock, bond, mutual fund to buy. But wealth advisors, wealth consultants, as what we are truly encapsulating everything of what it goes when it comes to your financial needs and to making sure we're building you the best picture that we can that gets you from where you are now to where you want to be in the future, and looking for the most efficient and effective processes that are out there to get you from point A to point B. And at the same time, realizing there's going to be a lot of forks in the road. There's going to be a lot of pivot points. There's going to be a lot of different things. And I would guarantee all the attendees here that if you looked at your life 10 years ago compared to where you were today, what your priorities were 10 years ago aren't the same as what they are today. And your jobs might not be the same, and your careers might not be the same, and the company might not be the same. So you're going to hit some different pivot points in your life that you have to adapt your wealth plan to what the new variables bring to the table to make sure that you're still growing in the best way you can.
Awesome. And yeah, we all have those forks in the road. I think we all shared a major fork in the road a little over 5 years ago, which is sort of led pandemic kind of created some economic turmoil, created some economic opportunity. At the same time, crypto has been up and down, markets up and down. Now we've got funding and funding for startups changing. How do you advise professionals on that? Those are big issues that we're all facing right now.
And the big thing is that, everybody is an individual when you look at it, right? It's we do planning for you. You are our client, and everybody's going to have different circumstances and different situations and different things about their life that causes the plan to be altered from what somebody else's would be. And instead of doing rule of thumb mentality for everybody, we're going to find out what's important to you. What are your goals, dreams, aspirations? And let's build a plan based on your income and your situation and your value and your assets about how to make it bigger, better in the best way that we can. That's going to hit towards what you want to achieve out of life. Because just because maybe you're married with two kids and your neighbor is married with two kids and they're of a similar age doesn't mean you have the same trajectory. It doesn't mean that you're on the same path because you could have other variables in your life that are very much throwing it off. And we want to make sure that the planning is based on what you want as opposed to what someone like you wants. And that makes a huge difference. You're on mute, Dave, just so you know.
Thank you. My
Yeah.
the Zoom just alerted me. It said you're muted now. It was not brilliant, whatever I was saying, but no, thank you for that. And yeah, and of course, everyone, like you said, different goals, different paths. But I think one thing that is probably a lot of us have in common in the industry is for the past now 30 30 plus years, life sciences has been a growth industry, and right up there with kind of the computer technology industry. And of course, when you get high growth industries like that, you mentioned people moving jobs. A lot of this comes down to working with startups where your compensation is a mix of not just cash but equity. And equity is maybe never been easy, but it's maybe never been more complicated now with a bunch of different structures and things. And so, Mark, how do you assist clients with understanding how to navigate those paths?
Sure. Um, you bring up a great point about complexity, but I've always said complexity is kind of the flip side of the coin to opportunity, because ultimately we used to have maybe a couple of options, right? We had incentive stock options, we had non-qualified options. Each of those got taxed a little bit differently, were available to different kinds of people, right? Well, ultimately, we've got a whole lot more options available at our fingertips. Everything from restricted stock units to stock appreciation rights. Those oldie but goodie opportunities are still there as well. So ultimately, when it comes time to evaluate your compensation package in total, cash is cash. That's relatively easy, but there's a couple of things, a little bit of a tricky nuance to incentive comp that takes the form of equity, in that a lot of times you'll have vesting schedules that sometimes they're depending on time passing, sometimes they're dependent on project success, or maybe milestone dates, things like that. A lot of times you'll have different taxability based on the nature of the option or the grant itself. A lot of times the timing of that taxability might vary depending on the risk of forfeiture, all those things. There's so many variables, and I've got you'll see me looking off to my right. I just got a lot of talking points over here to just, and it's absurd the amount of information that I've got on this sheet. And so what my highest calling has always been is to kind of help understand these sorts of matters so that y'all can focus on the critical life-saving science development that y'all are doing, right? So if my highest purpose is to make sure that y'all can serve at y'all's highest purpose, then my responsibility is to help walk through these things with you. And so that involves pulling those option agreements together. Let's make sure we're reading through those, make sure that we understand the terms, make sure we understand when in the life cycle of those options different triggering points might happen that we need to think about. And so that all starts way back in time. That starts probably before you move to this job. That starts with a pretty deep relationship with your tax advisor, your wealth advisor, just to make sure that you've had those conversations, you understand, because what's going to happen is you're going to have some success in research. You're going to have a new product idea. You're going to have an opportunity to potentially find investors, find collaborators out there. It might look like a little bit of some different options. If you got a comp that's mostly cash or comp that's mostly future equity, there's a little bit of risk that's associated with that, but the upside could be fantastic. So just being able to have that conversation with somebody as you're making those decisions, I think that's kind of critical. And so the complexity there is not insignificant, but ultimately, I think my advice would simply be know that it's coming, know that there are people out there that can help walk through the kind of the nuances and to help you understand and help you make the most informed choice you can so that you can continue to focus on the differences that you're making in the scientific community.
Yeah, no, really, really good insight. And is this, just how someone approach these decisions, does that, maybe change over their career? Do you kind of, factor in where they are, or even the risk of these companies? Kind of how closely aligned do you get, or, deep into the details can you get with this?
We could get pretty deep. And so there's a couple of, so the stock comp stuff becomes valuable as the value of the company underlying the equity is enhanced, right? And so a little bit of this, again, I alluded to it before, it's a little bit of a risk that you're betting on yourself, you're betting on your team, you're betting on the idea, the goals, the aspirations of that group. And so ultimately, in doing that, you've got to take that risk into consideration when you're evaluating different alternatives. Now, there are certain things you can do. I'm always going to put my tax hat on when I get a chance. There are certain things you can do from a tax perspective when given certain types of these awards that can kind of make them more tax efficient as you go. For example, and I'm going to give you this example, maybe not because it's always applicable, but when it is applicable, the time frame is very short for acting, right? So if you get certain types of equity grants, you could potentially make an election to be taxed on the current value of that option right now when the value is low. You don't know, you don't have a working prototype, you don't have whatever you need to kind of enhance the value of that company. So you can be taxed on that right now. And then all the appreciation of that stock value becomes capital gain in nature. So that's a potential maybe 20% tax rate difference in those two treatments. But if you do that, that's called an 83B election. And if it's applicable, you have 30 days from the day that grant is issued, that option's issued, to make the election. So that's not something you can have in a planning discussion at the end of the year that, hey, in April, we made this election, or I got this equity compensation. What kind of things can I do to save on tax? Well, at that point in time, the ship has already sailed. And so we've lost a little bit of our tax efficiency then. So that's why I always come back to being in a relationship business. It's important that you're have a good enough relationship with your advisor team to where you can have these conversations real time so that they can understand the ramifications real time and then help you make those decisions to make the most tax efficient choice possible.
Got it. No, that's great. Thank you. Super helpful. And just stepping back, a little bit more. Brian, earlier you had mentioned kind of potentially being the first point of contact with some of this, and part of that is at some point people start thinking about having to put together, whether it's will, power of attorney, health directive. There's a lot of different documents and maybe times of life when someone should initiate those. Talk about sort of what are the options there, and when should someone start thinking about these?
I always bring up, I was talking to a friend of mine. I mean, in theory, some of these documents you start talking about as soon as you turn 18. Or you have kids that are 18, because basic stuff like medical information, once you turn 18, your medical information is private from everybody, and who can get access to that information, let alone make decisions for you if you couldn't. If you're in a car accident, who can the doctor talk to? It's not your parents, because they have no automatic authority, and so that's why you need documents giving somebody authority, A, to get information about you, and then B, make decisions. And so that's really the kind of the start. For most of my clients, that's not, they'll do it for their kids sometimes. But the reality is the bulk of my clients, at the earliest, they're typically in their 30s. And now they're usually either getting married or having kids or own a home. Those are usually the three triggering things that most commonly people that are young will come to us to start doing things, because now there's something at stake. I know something, Mark was talking about, for those people that are getting equity stakes or are forming their own company or a partner in a company, that's great. That's great. And you have this plan, there's this financial business plan. But if something happens to you, then what? Who's in charge? Who's going to execute that plan? Who's going to go, whatever options you earn, exercise, whatever, or if you have a business, who's authorized to deal with your partners? Or if you have, like I have a business, my firm, if something happens to me, who's taking over my firm? How does that work? And I know what to do, but I'm not going to be here. And if that's the case. And so that's that's what, we're the start of the planning, which is who's in charge. Okay. Because someone's got to be in charge to execute the plan. And then there's all kinds of planning depending on whether it's your own business, buy-sell agreements, what happens to those options, key man insurance. I mean, there's all these issues, but who's executing that? Who does that company talk to? Or who does your family, who do they talk to at that company? Okay. Or if you own a business like myself, well, what do they do? My wife, she would be in charge after me. Well, she's never stepped foot in this business. What does she do? I've got to educate her, but I first got to make sure she has authority, or if it's one of my in-laws, that's going to be in charge. I've got to make sure my documents will give them authority to do something, but then what do they do next? And so that's a big part of the planning on our side of things is, who's going to execute whatever the plan is. And sometimes the plan is simple. Again, if you don't have the business involved, then it's a lot simpler. But who's managing money on behalf of my kids if they're young, or even if they're young adults, or just who's going to make decisions for me. Like I said, that's the most important thing for, even if you don't have much, if I were in a car accident, and that's the single most dangerous to do is get in a car every day. If I was in a car accident, or maybe my wife were in a car accident, then what? Who's in charge? Who's making decisions? And you want to make sure you have a say, because if you don't have an estate plan, power of attorney, health directives, wills, trusts, and things like that, nobody's in charge. And that's where things get very expensive and time consuming. But again, beyond the cost, I mean, at the end of the day, you can solve a lot of those problems with money. The issues you can't solve with just money is, who do I trust? Who do I trust to execute those things? And I want to have a choice. Who takes care of my kids? Again, that's not about money. That's who's taking care of my kids. And that's what we're trying to do about this planning, is beyond the financial aspect, because those will sort out themselves out to some extent, but more personal aspects of, who do I trust to be in charge of me and or my assets, or most importantly, my kids.
Got it. And you talked about sort of like it doesn't, it's not just about money, but what does something like this cost? And leading into the question, this is a true story, because we were talking about it with the in our Philadelphia group earlier, and I fired up ChatGPT and I asked it to write a will, at least focusing on who gets custody of my kids. And it was kind of funny. I mean, first of all, I have my Chat GPT set to be to have a strong sarcastic sense of humor. So it went through this. Clearly we're not recommending that to people, but you can go to Google, you can you can pay $100 or whatever and have it download a template. Should anyone ever do that? Should they, skip that and go, right to you? Kind of, how do people make those decisions?
I mean, I always tell somebody something's better than nothing. Okay. And yeah, you can pay $100 for something and it might be okay. And I always, it's equivalent of going to WebMD and try to diagnose whatever illness you might have. You'll probably be right 75, 80% of the time, and, probably okay. I'm worried about the other 20, 25% of the time we're not. And then, anything that involves you telling something you're telling something decisions, whether it be, doing online or LegalZoom or whatever it is, they're executing a document at your direction. Okay. And again, maybe that's okay. My job as an attorney is to do things at your direction, but give you options, understand your goals, your concerns, and suggest ways how I'm going to achieve those goals or address those concerns. And then, potentially give you an opinion of what I think, not necessarily where I think any money should go, but if you want it to go this way and you have a concern, well, here's some options. And that's what you don't get when you do it through the internet. Again, they'll do something out your direction, but there's no opinion being offered. Okay.
Yeah.
It's about the effectiveness. Okay. The docs we produce are going to be comprehensive in the sense of it's going to have a lot of flexibility. It's going to anticipate things that probably never happen. Like we always have a clause for drugs and alcohol. You may not have an issue with anybody in your current family that has a drug or alcohol problem, but maybe, unfortunately, it could be one of your kids. It could be a niece or nephew that, that might get the money one day because, one of your siblings passed away. They may have an issue or special needs. These are things we write into a document that may not be an issue at the moment, but you never know. And so, we want to cover things, and that's why the trust, just like every other contract, keeps getting longer and longer because something's happened, and say, we got to address that. And typically the documents that are prepared by attorneys like myself are more comprehensive than anything you would get on over the internet or LegalZoom or anything like that.
Yeah, absolutely. And something we actually haven't talked about in these past few conversations, but it's I think we've got a little bit of time to touch on it. This is adults right now. We're this sandwich generation, and we've got this huge population, aging population, baby boomers, and then we've got our kids, and so. Curious how involved you might get in, with adult clients coming to you, and they're not only trying to figure this out for themselves, they're maybe trying to help their parents figure this out. And this is like whether it's helping their parents figure it out, helping them, it's helping figure out legacy for the grandchildren. How does that come into your advising?
I mean, there's obviously two approaches. Obviously, for me, the person who hired me, they're my client. So my initial concern is how do they make sure they take care of themselves? And obviously, they're talking to someone like Chris. They're doing the financial planning to deal with things like long-term care. I mean, that's the number one financial issue that isn't an issue at the moment because I always tell people, because they sometimes in the plan they say, oh, if I, especially like one spouse, I want to give X amount of money. I don't necessarily need it to all go to my spouse because based on our current expenses, they don't need that money. I said, that's fine. Again, if that's what you want to do, that's great. But if, what you have to consider is if something happens to one of you and if a bulk of the assets might leave the estate going to kids or somebody else, does the survivor of you have enough money to live on? And not just live on as you currently live on, but what if you got to pay for assisted living, in-home care, God forbid, nursing home, all those type of things. And, and that's what and while I don't do that's really more financial planning. That's, what Chris and his group does is the financial planning. That's a discussion I have, at least to make them aware. You need to talk to your financial advisor about making sure you're covered while you're alive. But the estate planning side says, well, if you're going to give your assets to somebody else other than your spouse, how's that going to look? And then, so that's the planning we're doing. And then, for the wealth planning, I guess, for generational wealth, we have, and that's where somebody like Mark comes in if they're fortunate enough to have a state tax issue, which is currently, and I expect to be the number 14 million per person, which, if you're fortunate enough to have that kind of issue, or 28 million for a couple, then, that's where we're definitely going to have more tax conversation with somebody like Mark to figure out how to deal with that potentially. But in terms of the building the wealth, whether it be life insurance or obviously whatever investing you're going to do, our trust, the planning we do, it in some sense it's not affected by how much money there is. Okay, so whether somebody has $1 million or 10 million or 20 million, the basic planning is, well, I want this person to be in charge. I want to go here. So that's what our plan is. We don't have to make necessarily all those decisions. And again, those things might change in the future. So, if circumstances do change and you want something different to be done, you can always change your mind about these things. But I was just talking to somebody today, they're getting stuck on they're having a hard time moving forward because they're getting stuck on some very unlikely scenarios to happen. And I said, well, there's some more important scenarios that might happen. You need to make sure those happen the way you want to happen, because if you don't do anything, then those things may not happen. And so, I try not to get my clients bogged down too much about the financial details, for example. Like we typically don't need a lot of financial information. I don't need all the account numbers. I need broad stroke type stuff. But I try to get our clients focused on the basics, make sure somebody's in charge and the money's going to go to whoever we want in the right way, and in the right fashion. And, we could talk about, lifetime asset protection for your kids. That's one of the biggest things we do now for our clients. If they want money to go to their kids, if something happens to, normally somebody, if I have two kids, $2 million, I pass away, my kids get $1 million each. Great. But now that money is exposed to their creditors, judgment, divorce, etc. We have an simple alternative way for them to get the money. We call a dynasty trust that gives the kids lifetime asset protection, but they still have complete control and access to the money. Unique situation, because I can't do this for you as my client, but you can do it for your kids or your parents. Again, talking about the plan, your parents could do it for you. Especially for those of us who are in liability, risky professions like attorneys or doctors. If I'm going to inherit anything from them, I really like them to do it for me. So I have options to have that money protected. Because otherwise I don't have those options for the most part. My money is mostly exposed. That's why we have to get insurance. But we do that for our clients, and as much, maybe for their kids, but it's also looking the other way, which is money they might inherit from their parents. We're encouraging them, whether we're doing the planning for them or whoever their existing estate planning attorney is, encouraging them to talk about that if that hasn't been discussed, because we find about half the people I run into that already have an estate plan, the attorney never discussed that option with them. And it's a real simple option for them to get that protection with with little or no downside for anybody.
Got it. No, that's super helpful. And you're sort of segueing into we're talking about if somebody comes to you and they start to ask these questions. There's certain areas where you can advise. There's other areas where it's gonna be more of a Chris or something like that. And so I'm going to segue to Chris in a second, but just as you meet a client for the first time, sort of what kind of what's the standard, call it, the onboarding questionnaire, if you will. You mentioned you don't need a lot of financial information, but sort of how should someone prepare to meet with an estate attorney like you, Brian, and then we'll kind of transition this over to getting in touch with Chris.
For our planning, again, I can't speak for all estate planning attorneys, but we try to make it pretty simple. 80%, 90% what I need to know is who do you love, who do you trust, and how much do you trust them? Okay, that starts with, especially when we're married, that starts with the spouses. Those are the big questions. The assets, they are what they are. I don't, like I said, I don't need a lot of information about, you're going to have to do things with those assets. Obviously, if you own real estate, we need to know about those specifically. But, if you have a business or invest in a business, we need to know about those things specifically. But the financial assets, we'll talk about it, but I don't need to know a lot of specifics about that. I don't need to know who's going to get your China set. I don't need to know that. I need to know who you want to support. Who do you want to take care of? I'm not going to tell you who to take care of, but who do you want to take care of them, and how do you want to take care of them? Those are the things that, ideally you've thought about. But again, the trust part is the biggest one. Usually most of us know who we love, and my kids presumably change this on a day-to-day basis. They're teenagers.
It's tough to know that. I'm with you on that one.
Is, who do I trust? When my kids are young, they can't do it. So who do I trust to execute those things?
Yeah.
And that's, for some of us, that is a big challenge, especially, small families don't have a lot of relatives, or worse yet, they have relatives they don't trust. That is a problem. And that's, there are ways to deal with that. But, at the end of the day, I always tell you got to trust somebody, whether it be your, relatives, friends, banks, if you have to, private fiduciaries. We got to figure out who you trust, because right now, if you don't have a plan, nobody's in charge. And that's where things get chaotic and expensive. And that's what we're trying to solve, is make sure somebody's in charge. Because again, it's not, in my case, it's not an issue. If something happens to my wife, the money's going to the kids. That's not going to be the issue. It's who's doing it, who's in charge of my kids, and most importantly, when will my kids get the money? Because I don't want them getting the money at 18.
Yeah.
So, those are the basic issues we're dealing with. And so, like I said, I try not to, I know at least for my practice, try to make it simple for our clients. It really comes down to some basic. Now, obviously, we have clients that are more complex, and we'll deal with those issues too. But the bulk of my clients, it's usually, again, maybe not necessarily straightforward, but it is, most of the questions, hopefully they know the answer to, other than who's in charge.
Got it. Now that's great. And Chris, kind of thinking about this bigger picture, because we've Brian's touched a couple times on a bit of where he's not involved, but where does wealth management come in? So how do you start working with a client? What does that initial conversation look like, and how do you weave in sort of a conversation with a Brian or a Mark to help maximize value for your clients?
Yeah, the big thing with us is our first meeting is a pretty in-depth conversation, right? And at the end of the day, the more we know about our clients, the better plan and the better strategy we can put together for those clients. So sometimes we have to ask the hard questions, but there's a reason behind it. And when we know more about you and we know more about your situation and we know what those goals are, but we also know the different circumstances that are out there that alter those plans, it becomes very, very important. So we kind of similar to like a doctor when you're meeting a doctor for the first time, they have here's our kind of our questionnaires, what hurts, what are you allergic to, like all those different things. We have something similar. It gives us kind of the bones, so to speak, of what we're going to be dealing with. And what we do is we take that information, and when we actually sit down for the first meeting, we have the skeleton there. And what we're going to do is we're going to put some meat on the bones. We're going to ask the more emotional questions versus the physical questions and say, why is this structured this way? Why is it this? What was your thinking process to going towards it? What do you want to achieve? Why? All the different things. What happens if you don't, and get a better understanding so we can build what we call the roadmap in the best way possible. And then the biggest thing when it comes to how we do our planning is that we understand that there's going to be pivots. There's going to be forks in the road. There's going to be different things. We talked about this as one in one of the other webinars as well. But if you go back 10 years and thought about what your priorities were and where you stood in life and all those different things, your life is drastically different than what it was before. So when you're building a plan, you have to have the ability to pivot and you have to have the ability to alter those different things. And we make sure our plans have optionality inside of it. So when a pivot needs to happen, when something happens, when that fork is hit, that we know in a rough estimate which direction we're going to go. Because you can build a roadmap, but if your destination is constantly changing, you got to be able to change your map along with it, right? And at the end of the day, that becomes dramatically important to making sure you're hitting what your goals are because the goals are constantly changing. And once you hit a goal, are you done? Or do you change your goals? Do you increase your goals? What are you doing with it? Because we're going to be ecstatic when you hit your goals, but what happens if you hit it early? What happens if you hit it late? What are you altering and what are you changing in order to make sure what's going to happen? And what if tax law changes? What if estate law changes? What if all these different things that come along change? How are we going to pivot to change along with those things?
Yeah, great. And so how do you help bring a Brian, bring a Mark into that conversation, and sort of what's the role you play, and how do you want them to be involved in those same conversations?
Yeah, for us, it's similar to who do you have now? Who's part of your team? Do you have an accountant? Do you have an estate attorney? Do you have a lawyer? Do you have all these different things? What are they doing for you? Are they the best at what they're doing, or can you find a way to make it better, right? If you're not achieving the best thing you can from your current advisor or professional, then maybe you need a new advisor or professional, right? In life sciences, very few people have wills. We've talked about that quite dramatically. 95% of people inside of life sciences have no estate plan whatsoever. So we deal a lot with people like Brian to say that because we consider your estate plan one of the fundamental pieces of what's going on, and not necessarily just an estate, your protection plan, right? And making sure you have all the different power of attorney documents and different things that go along there. So if you don't have one, which is usually the case, we can introduce you to somebody who has that experience, who has that authority that can walk you through the process to the best of the ability, like Brian was describing earlier. If you have an accountant, great. What is your accountant doing for you? What plan do they have in place? Or is everybody on your team on the same page? And similar to a business, when you're all working towards the same goals, you can achieve things a lot easier. If the CEO wants this to happen and the chief operating officer is on a different path and the CFO is on a completely different path to what the goals are, that business is going to crumble at some point in time. because you got too much divergence off of what each one is trying to do. When you have that common goal and that common system, which to us is the client, right? So if we're all operating on the same page and we're all working towards the same goals for the client, then we can operate in a very effective and efficient manner for our clients to making sure everything is going to be saved for them.
Really, really interesting. That's good thinking. I like the idea. I mean, obviously, things change over time. And Mark, want to kind of take that back to you because we talked a little bit about this, but let's think about somebody who has gone through multiple roles, as we've been talking about, kind of the nomadic existence of some of these executives, and they're maybe they're walking around with a handful or more of different equity plans from different companies. How does that fit into that kind of estate planning? Do you get involved in the advising around that? This is not like cash in the bank. These are could be worth a lot, could be worth nothing. How does that factor in, and do you get involved there?
So the one thing that does, right, when you have a relatively sophisticated portfolio of options, equity, you probably got some sort of investment, right? One of the three of us is probably your primary entry point into what I would call financial complexity, right? As soon as you get to that stage in your career, whether it's when you're starting to think about starting your own business, whether it's how do I attract investors into this joint venture that I'm forming to create this product, to create this device, those complexities will usually it's a complexity, it's a life event that will trigger you to introduce yourself to one of the folks on this call or somebody like us, right? So it's really important that we go from that single point source of entry to having a broader team in place. I said this on the last call, and one of my colleagues was on the call, and he loved the saying, so I think I'm going to stick with it. The three of us have different roles, or wealth management, wealth advisory, tax folks, and then estate planning. We all play a different role. I would say that Chris's role in his client's life is being effective, right? He wants to be effective with the way with your assets, right? He wants to make sure you get the biggest bang for your buck. My goal is to make that as tax efficient as possible. So the government wants their slice. I've always told clients to make a bunch of money. It is not a burden, but a privilege to pay taxes, but you don't want to pay more than your fair share, right? So tax efficiency is mine. And you come to Brian to make sure that endures over time, right? So the old Baptist minister's son, I'm not a Baptist minister's son, but I was in church enough. I like things that are alliterative, right? So you've got effectiveness, efficiency, and endurance, right? Those are key components. And if you don't have all three of those together, then you don't have a plan that holds up, right? Ultimately, you can have everything in place, and if it flitters away 90 minutes after you're gone, that's not great. Or if Uncle Sam's taken 50% of everything that you've done, that's not a good plan either. So ultimately, it's just important for whoever you're going to make at some point in time, it's probably already happened, maybe it's happening in the future. The financial complexity of your personal situation is going to get to the point where you're having a conversation with somebody at some stage in this cycle. It's just important to get more people involved early on. So that would be my goal. Is as soon as I've got somebody, they've got exposure, they've got kiddos that are that you don't know what their care situation is going to be like if something were to happen to you. I've got to get them introduced to Brian. If they got some other things to navigate from a wealth advisory perspective, I want to get them introduced to Chris very early on in the process, because ultimately that more comprehensive approach is going to drive better results.
Yeah, no, and I think I like this idea that obviously you want to start early, and then as you're saying, people are going to come in from different perspectives, and any one of the three of you or anyone like the three of you can help identify who are those other partners that someone might not have, and ultimately, I really love this. If effective, efficient, enduring. That is a good one, and the alliteration definitely helps.
That's right.
All over that. So now this is really really good conversation, and there's a lot of different directions we could go with this if we had more time. And by the way, if anyone has a burning question, we've got probably time for a question or two. But just kind of preempting some of the ending here. We'll definitely follow up via email, so you have all the contact information of everyone who's been on today. And we encourage you to reach out and ask questions. We encourage you to figure this out, whether it's in California. If you're elsewhere, just dial into this one. We can certainly help with connections in our other parts of the country where we've been doing these conversations. So please feel free to reach out to Chris or me about that. And so as we kind of go into the last few minutes here, we've all given lots of great guidance. I think between the three of you, some tremendous value in terms of ideas here. If you could kind of boil this down to what are one or two actions that you would love to see everyone on this take when they right when they get off the Zoom, what would it be? And Brian, we'll start with you. Kind of what should somebody be doing tonight, tomorrow, before the weekend?
I would say one, as much as you need to do the planning, you got to make sure somebody knows the logistics. Where's all the money? What bills to pay? One thing I encourage my clients, if estate plan or not, you need to have on your person an emergency contact list in your kid's backpack, in your car, on your refrigerator, at work. You need to have a list of people. If something happened to you, who to contact. That's the initial planning, and then, like I said, we'll get it. And then our job after that is get it on paper so that once those people are contacted, they've got authority to do something. But still, someone's got to know who's what, what's where, and who to contact. That's probably the single most important not the most important, but that's where you got to start. You got to make sure somebody would know what to do when you can't, and at least know who to talk to.
Yeah, and is that does that include passwords and things like that? Like,
I wouldn't even worry about that at this
that
stage.
kind of stuff.
I mean, that'd be good, but I'm more concerned. If my wife, I have a ton of clients who have very little relatives here. They're immigrants. They're working here. They have almost no relatives here. Something happens to them, who's going to know? I mean, forget about what happens to the money and all that stuff. I mean, that we'll deal with that eventually. But who's that initial contact? Emergency contact list. That's what I encourage my clients. Number one thing to do, and then again, we do the next step, which is the planning after that, to make sure whoever those emergency contacts are, they would know what to do, and have the authority to do it.
Got it. Great. Mark, what's your call to action when someone gets off the call?
You're on mute, Mark.
Come on. There you go.
Okay.
Sorry about that. So call to action. I said it brilliantly in the 3 seconds I was on mute. I encourage everybody to identify the team that they're serving with, right? Allow us the opportunity to take some of the financial burdens off your shoulders so you can focus on the science, the development, the life-changing benefits that you're providing. Find those people early. So make sure that you've got that network. And this is the other little bit. Come up with what you want those people to give you in that relationship, and hold your team accountable to that, right? If you're only hearing from your tax person once a year, and it's when you deliver your box of goods, please, number one, please don't bring a box. But if you're bringing goods, if you're bringing input, right, and I'm going to sit here and I'm going to put it into a tax return, and I'm going to deliver you a tax return. If that's the extent of your relationship with your tax advisor, you don't really have a tax advisor. You have a tax preparer, and you might get a great return out of that, but you need a little bit more. So be thinking about what you need in that relationship, and then hold your tax team accountable to that. That's true in the estate planning side and in the wealth management side as well. It's just important that you because ultimately we're trying to facilitate your goal achievement, right? And if we're not doing that in an effective way, then it might be time to find somebody that can help you, to arm you, to help you pull the right levers at the right time to make sure that you're being as effective as possible.
Excellent. And Chris, take us home. What's that call to action right now?
Yeah, like I've said in the other ones, like a goal without a plan is a wish, right? Do you want something to happen, or do you just wish that it happens? And if you work together, if you work with people, goals can be achieved. Like there's no doubt about it, right? If you want something bad enough, if you work for it, you can get it, right? So whatever you're doing, whether it comes to estate planning, whether it comes to tax planning, when it comes to wealth planning, if you want a better life, make that call, make that first step, and sit down with somebody who's going to work with you to make your life better. And at the end of the day, you got to take those first positive steps. And whether it's a baby step or a giant leap, do something to make your life better than what it currently is. Because we bring a lot to the table. Take advantage of our knowledge, take advantage of our systems, take advantage of our process, and use it for yourself. Be selfish and utilize what we can bring to the table for you to make your life better for you and your family.
Perfect. Well, that's really, really great guidance from all. This is a great conversation as always. Chris, I want to thank you for kind of the inspiration to bring this series together. Really appreciate it. Incredible insights. Mark, as always, you are a trooper, and we'll see you again tomorrow in some different parts of the country. Brian, this has been great. Want to thank everyone on behalf of Big Four Bio. Really appreciate everyone's time. We'll be following up, and please stay in touch, and hopefully we can send some feedback. We'd love to make this better as we go next time, and please build your team. Reach out to your advisors after this, and appreciate everyone's time. We'll talk soon. Have a good evening.
Take care, everybody.
Thanks,
Chris.
everybody.
David.
Thanks,
Mark.
guys.
Everybody.
See you guys.